throughout the world.
Most of you heard the question, but I'll paraphrase it to make sure that I answer it correctly. The gentleman asked how the derivatives, which is a generic term for strange securities.
CDOs,
CDOs, yeah. How that will impact liquidity on the banks. The answer is, I don't know. I don't think anybody knows. What they do is they add another layer of leverage on an already insanely over-leveraged system. Buffett describes a situation where two young rocket scientists designed a customized 15-year-long mutual obligation. And both of them book a profit for bonus purposes in the quarter they originate the transaction. That's not the way trade works. I mean, it's supposed to be mutually profitable, but these are unpriced securities. There was a popular phrase on Wall Street 10 years ago. They don't dare say it anymore, but there was a popular phrase among Wall Street operatives 10 years ago. It went like this: I won't be here, you won't be here. What is here is federal deposit insurance and all of the mechanisms of preventing the fraud from being exposed and preventing people like you and I from acting rationally to protect ourselves from it. The idea that, I won't name the names, but that some of the big banks would have $35 trillion in notional value of derivatives on their books, and that they are trying to be a funded intermediary with $20 billion in equity is farcical. The argument that they propose is that these are hedged obligations, that they don't have a $35 trillion net exposure. Trillion's a big word, by the way. It's a lot of zeros. What they're arguing is that their net exposure is half of that. I feel better. The thing that they neglect to mention is that if a counterparty can't pay, the flip side of that obligation, which they're hedged on, becomes valueless, becomes absolutely valueless. It's their balance sheet that's the balance sheet of last resort. And to the extent that if you add back in these derivatives, these banks have an equity slice of well less than 1%. I'm not trying to say that this is what would bring the banking system down, but I know for sure I'm not smart enough to run a balance sheet with 1/2 of 1 cent in equity against $1 in variably performing asset obligations. What you learn very early on in business, and then very thoroughly in business, is that your assets are ephemeral, but your liabilities are always money good. Does that help? Cheyenne, kick me off when I'm done.
Hello, my name is Robert David. I have a question about LIBOR. I'm not sure if it's within your realm of expertise, but I find it curiously absent in the mainstream media, the coverage of this.
The LIBOR manipulation.
LIBOR rate rigging scandal. Yet it's just the 16 largest banks in the world caught rigging, interest rates among one another.
That was my second question.
What is the? I'm really trying to understand the relevance of this event more than anything. It seems to be.
The gentleman mentions that a large number of international banks, I guess beginning with Barclays, either solely or sometimes as a cabal, manipulated the most important lending rate in the world, the London Interbank rate. And they allegedly did this so that they could make money speculating in bonds. By controlling the LIBOR rate, they controlled the prices of the bonds, which were based off LIBOR. The consequences of this, of course, to holders of derivatives and other interest rate sensitive instruments are incredible. The regulators are in an interesting set of circumstances. They're trying to keep the banks afloat, and they are at the same time set upon convicting them of a crime that has a $600 or $700 billion minimal implication. The thing that interests me about the whole scandal is that the financial press, and in fact the mainstream press, are absolutely outraged about the bank's manipulation of interest rate. And they don't say anything about the manipulation of interest rates by the central bank. The idea that the US government, as an example, can drive down our rates, in other words, can declare war on savers, And there's no suggestion that that's a manipulation. There's an income transfer in the United States, a private income transfer of $400 billion a year from people who work through their lives and save through their retirement. And they don't get the interest that they deserve as a consequence of government manipulation of the interest rate. And yet there's this enormous hue and cry about people who we already knew were gangsters, manipulating LIBOR. I'm not excusing the LIBOR manipulation. You know, it's what you would expect it to be. I wouldn't say it was sanctioned by the regulators, but certainly the banks have been kept afloat since 2008 by the regulators. So to say that they weren't indirectly complicit for not shooting these guys in the year 4 years ago. Do you remember 4 years ago? Well, these guys cost all this money, billions and billions and billions of dollars. And then their boards of directors said, we got to pay these guys big bonuses or they'll leave. I mean, if I was running one of those banks, that's not a discussion we would have had. You know, why? Anyway, I go on a tangent.
Last question. Just wanted to ask you about Vancouver real estate because, well, you're here and it seems like we've got this huge bubble in real estate and real estate drives this entire economy, or a very, very big part of it. And we just keep hearing the bubble's going to burst, something's going to give, and the CMHC and the cheap money, it's always there. So I just wanted to reconcile this, or just get a few of your comments on how far can we keep going on this route.
I'm part of the problem. My wife and I own a condo here, which we love. And we realize it's selling for probably 3 times what it's worth based on the rent that we could receive for it. And it's not for sale. One of the problems that Vancouver has from an economic point of view is it's drop dead gorgeous, so people want to live here. I suspect that part of the real estate bubble in Canada, in Vancouver at least, well, in Canada generally, has to do with subsidized mortgages, you know, a socialized interest rate. And I think some of it has to do with flight capital from China. I have a couple of well-connected Chinese clients who do business in China because they know how to do business in China, but export their kids to Canada, just in case. I don't know this to be the case, by the way. You know, I'm a resource guy, and I'm a credit analyst, not a real estate analyst. But when I first lived in Vancouver in the 1970s, I used to buy duplexes and triplexes in the east end of Vancouver. And my rule of thumb is that I would pay 100 times the monthly rent for a house on the theory that I could paint it up a little bit, increase the rents by 8% a year, and come out over time. You know, I looked at a house as a bond. When the baby boomers came through the situation, there was this incredible demographic bulge that came through and drove demand for housing. People began to think of real estate as an asset that couldn't go down in price. So I think there's a residual attraction to real estate from people looking at the fact that it worked as an investment for 30 years and maybe not understanding why it worked for 30 years. I think there's a suggestion, an accurate suggestion, that the costs of owning real estate are artificially low as a consequence of the interest rates. And I suspect that part of the demand in real estate in Vancouver is a consequence of flight capital from Asia. But I want to caveat all that by saying I don't have an awful lot of faith in my expertise in real estate. So it was free information. Probably I charge you more than Ladies and gentlemen, I'm done. Thank you very much.